beneficial, and well-attended MILCOM activity. This is an important topic for our entire community. We need to get after how we exchange data rights, how we sustain and maintain our C4 systems to be more efficient and affordable. You guys have heard over the last day and a half of the conference or so, a theme that we've picked up on is over the last 15 years of conflict, we've really done a great job of rapidly fielding capabilities. And if you look across the operational community, they're the first to tell you that. But to a degree, what has fallen by the wayside throughout that process is paying attention to a couple critical components. One is working life cycle sustainment plans into programs up front, so we know what the plan is going into sustainment of how these systems will be maintained. Standardization of equipment, integration and training capability and capacity to not only build unit proficiency, but also ensure that we have solid maintenance plans in place to ensure that replacement parts are expeditiously sent to operational units and they're provided the right capability and capacity. Today we're going to have a discussion centered around how as a community we can flex the organic base to support maintenance and sustainment efforts. We'll work to ensure that we have life cycle management plans built into our programs and work together to begin the conversation of how we can exchange data rights to ensure affordable sustainment going forward. We have 4 distinguished panel members today. Mr. Larry Mazzello, Deputy to the Commanding General, CECOM. Mr. Brian Young, the Director of the Army Contracting Command, APG. Mr. Stan Nemec, the Product Leader for Network Enablers at PEO C3T. Stan gets all the hard questions. Matter of fact, he'll probably take all the questions. Thank you very much, Stan. And last but not least, Robert Glowacki, who is a logistics management specialist at Tobyhanna Army Depot. Stan will help Robert with all of the questions for Tobyhanna as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Mazzello, and we'll provide about half an hour or so of commentary and then take your questions from the audience.
So I want to make sure that distinguished panel members is unquote so I can play it back to my 6-year-old son who definitely doesn't think I'm distinguished at all. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of the Communication Electronics Command. We're responsible for sustainment of the Army's C4, our weapon systems in the Army C4 portfolio. We maintain operational readiness of systems through supply chain management, integrated logistics support, hardware, software depot maintenance, and field support. And the primary focus of today's discussion will be the hardware, software depot maintenance, and how we can use public-private partnerships to achieve that. We provide ILS management support to ensure supportability and sustainment implications are considered early in the acquisition process, that those are codified and then executed as a program is developed and runs through the acquisition lifecycle. We also provide software acquisition support to ensure that appropriate software technical data is procured so that the software is sustainable and lab resources or laboratories are equipped to ensure that we can maintain software after systems transition to sustainment. As programs are formulated and executed, it's critical that realistic, achievable, and cost-effective sustainment strategies are developed and put in place. DoD 5000 requires that sustainment strategies include the best use of public and private sector capabilities. These sustainment strategies require the best mix in terms of capability, skills, infrastructure, partnering, compliance with Title X, public-private flexibility, and affordability. Public-private partnerships are a supportability consideration that should be captured early on in the development of a sustainment strategy. Title X United States Code 2464 states that it's essential for the national defense that the Department of Defense maintain a core logistics capability that is government-owned and government-operated to ensure a ready and controlled source of technical competence and resources necessary to ensure effective and timely response to national defense contingency situations, mobilizations, and other emergency requirements. This Title X also specifies that under depot maintenance, partnerships can help satisfy core logistics capability by establishing relationships between commercial providers and the Department of Defense's organic depots. Title X United States Code 2474 provides for the designation of Centers of Industrial and Technical Excellence, or SITE. Site designations serve to identify depots as recognized leaders in their core competency and encourages them to enter into public-private partnerships. Through sites, these public-private cooperative arrangements are both authorized and encouraged. Public-private partnerships reduce or eliminate the cost of ownership for a depot. In such areas, I should say, as operations, maintenance, and environmental remediation. They help to reduce costs to the Department of Defense. They leverage private sector investment in plant and equipment recapitalization. They help foster cooperation between the Department of Defense and private industry. Tobyhanna has site designation for C4SR equipment, as well as electronics, avionics, and missile guidance and control system. So they are the site for C4SR hardware support within the Army. For software, the Army has no site designations. This is unlike the other services. We are currently within CCOM for our Software Engineering Center pursuing site designation for software. That will be the first site for software capability within the Army. That site designation is currently pending Headquarters Department of the Army approval. We see that site as allowing us to align our software sustainment capabilities or activities with the respective POs that we support, and it will allow us to provide sustainment through our depot maintenance partnerships with industry partners. Our objective in pursuing a software site designation is to be able to leverage the capabilities of the CCOM Software Engineering Center with industry to enhance Army capabilities to perform software depot maintenance and ensure we have a comprehensive core depot maintenance, software maintenance capability. So we view public-private partnerships as being critical to maintaining and sustaining a fully integrated industrial base that leverages the competencies, infrastructure, resources of both the public and private sector, and that they are essential to optimizing our weapons system product support during sustainment. These public-private partnerships provide benefits such as contributing to the ability of sustaining core capabilities within the DoD, improving facility and equipment utilization, thereby decreasing overhead costs per unit, by introducing commercial innovation, technology, and management practices into the organic product support processes, facilitating our access, I should say, to commercial technical data, technologies, and repair processes that we would not otherwise have access to or that would not otherwise be available. So in summary, public-private partnerships provides the public and private sectors an opportunity to work together to support increasingly complex and advanced technologies, especially in the C4SR domain. It will combine technical competencies to provide of both the public and private sectors to provide effective and efficient sustainment to the Department of Defense, and in particular to the United States Army. So I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Brian Young. He's the Executive Director of the Army Contracting Center at Aberdeen Proving Ground. He's going to describe some of the characteristics of the PPPs. He'll talk to contracting considerations as well as liability considerations. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. Next slide. This is the definition of a public-private partnership. It's a cooperative arrangement between an organic product support provider, and those have to be designated as Center of Industrial and Technical Excellence, so that's the government entity, and one or more private sector entities to perform defense-related work or to utilize DoD facilities and equipment, or both. They can take multiple forms. They can be a lease, it can be a work share, or it can be direct sales. And the direct sales are an arrangement where the private partner directly acquires the articles or services from the public partner. The note at the bottom gives you really the type of flexibilities that we have in these agreements. They can either result in a contract, it can result in a partnership agreement and or an implementation agreement. So there really is quite a bit of flexibility that can exist between the private sector entity and the government entity. Next slide. So what are the benefits to the government? And when I list these benefits, I don't want to imply that every PPP has all of those as benefits. So some of them may have more than one of these characteristics, but they don't necessarily have all. But theoretically, the benefits are they improve operational efficiencies, they lower the cost of products and services, they accelerate and can accelerate innovation, they secure private investment for the public sector entity, and they sustain critical skills and capabilities. So a fully integrated defense sustainment industrial base, one that leverages the competencies, the infrastructure, and the resources of both public and private sector is essential to our national security. This is one means of being able to do that and being able to integrate the government capabilities with the private sector. Now, what are the benefits to industry? Next chart. So industry can have access to advanced technology and equipment, facilities. They can have the potential use of hard-to-receive hazardous waste permits, and as the regulatory environment constrains some more, most of the government facilities have legacy access to permits. They can leverage long-term use agreements, decrease capital investment on the part of the private sector by leveraging the capabilities already existing within the government sector. They can leverage ISO certified facilities and Lean Six Sigma processes without having to go through that very exhaustive certification process. They can have access to diversified and deployable workforce, and they can operate out of secure locations. Now, what are the characteristics that a partnership needs to achieve success? These were pulled from a GAO report, which remarkably had a lot of good things to say about something that they went and delved into depth. So we thought we'd kind of toot our horn on what those were. So you have a long-term relationship and commitment. This isn't something to be done for short periods of time. You develop mutual trust and shared risk. You have a shared partnership vision and objectives. And I know the term industry partners is one that we in the government have used quite a bit, and some folks in the Defense Department have said, well, you know, you really shouldn't use that word because partnership implies that you have a mutual commitment to the same outcomes, and that's not always true. But in the case of a PPP, it absolutely is true. So you have the flexibility to change the partnership scope. You need to have the right metrics and the right incentives. If you just enter into this with the notion that goodness will break out, that you may not get the results you need. You can balance the workload, balance it within the private sector facilities or balance it within the government sector facilities. In order to be successful, they need early acquisition community involvement. It also should be subject to independent review and oversight. It's most successful when industry and the government team together and bring complementary skills to the table. It doesn't do a lot of good if we both have skills in one area and neither of us have skills in another. We enforce the partnership decisions and requirements. It is oftentimes, in fact, a contract and therefore is enforceable. It has senior level advocacy, both on the part of the government and on the part of industry. There is full coordination with all stakeholders, and all stakeholders are not simply the government entity and the private sector entity. There can be multiple stakeholders on the government side. There is a sound business case analysis. In other words, we're entering into this because it makes business sense to do so, and then we pursue the partnership in the context of that business case. And we have clearly documented objectives in the partnering agreement. If it's a contract, we have clearly documented objectives and measurable outcomes in the contract. So next chart, please. So in order for the government entity to participate in a PPP, they must be an approved center of industrial and technical excellence. And what this is a list on the next 2 pages of those within the Army Materiel Command and within the Army. And Robert will be talking a little bit more about some of the capabilities that Toby Hanna has with respect to some of the other services as well. But these are the approved sites, which pretty much equal the Army Materiel Command depot and organic industrial base facilities. Next chart, please. So the contracting considerations, when you're going to do this, what are the primary things that you need to implement? Under a facilities use, you need to have an inter-service support agreement between the installation and the program manager or the requiring activity, but in most cases, the program manager and the requiring activity are the same. And the facilities can be provided either as GFE on the contract or by a separate FAR contract. The workforce. The depot and the arsenal work by a government workloading system. In other words, the private sector uses government workforce at the government facility to execute work on behalf of the private sector. Industry work is via a FAR contract. And finally, in the direct sales arrangement, the government is in essence a subcontractor to industry. And we often think of the government being a subcontractor to industry for government and government-related work, but it doesn't have to be, and Robert will talk about this where with the case of Toby Hanna, it doesn't have to be specific to the service where the site activity belongs. And again, you can see that using this chart that the different pieces of the puzzle come together in the facilities and services via direct sales contract. So we've listed on the next chart some contracting best practices. And this is really just not an inclusive list of everything that needs to be there, but the contract language for consideration as a means to increase flexibility, to change the partnership scope, and share risk with industry partners. We can use equitable adjustments. I'll talk a little bit more about legal liability indemnification. The best effort associated with a contract versus a specific outcome. Liquidated damages, and then importantly, the non-applicability of flow-down clauses and provisions for the FAR and TINA for PPP agreements. Because those flow-down clauses typically flow from one private sector entity to another private sector entity. In the case where the government is the subcontractor, those clauses do not flow down. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about liability considerations. Federal law requires that the private firm indemnifies the government from any loss or damages the private firm may incur as a result of partnering with the government-owned depot. The Anti-Deficiency Act, which pretty much says we're not allowed to put something on contract that we don't have funds for, precludes us from incurring an open-ended contingent liability. So again, the Anti-Deficiency Act narrows the scope of the liability that the government may have. And the government signatory to the PPP may not have the authority to waive contractual or tort claims on behalf of the government or the agency or the U.S. And that's particularly important where we have agreements in lieu of specific contracts. Those are just some of the considerations that you need to take into account when you're doing PPPs. At this time, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Stan Nemec.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. Now that you've had the technical side of it, let's get down to where some of the actual application takes place. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. My organization, Network Enablers, my PM shop, is made up of 5 very distinct, very unique organizations that have no common mission except to make sure that the network works and is secure. The 3 that are on the left side of the screen are the ones that are actively involved in the public-private partnership right now through Toby Hanna. My other 2 will be probably coming on board as the software side of the house begins to mature as well. Next slide, please. The way that I operate my organization is that I don't believe in the mantra of cost, schedule, performance. Everybody in the Army always talks cost, schedule, performance, but they always forget probably one of the most important, that's the sustainment. What comes later? How do we take care of that equipment once it's in the field and no longer belongs to us per se, but the troops are using it as they need to get it repaired or do whatever. In this particular case, as we need to get it out to the field, as the contractors are working with us to make that happen. And one of those areas specifically is working with my partners at CCOM through the ACC, up at Toby Hanna, to be able to put together a viable contract that both is cost-effective for the government, aka taxpayers, and gets the contractors themselves an opportunity to be able to produce a better product for us. Public-private partnerships, I believe, have to be established early in the program. If we wait, which is also typical in a lot of programs, until later in a program build, it's going to be way too late to be able to make sure that the contract actions that are being put together I've already properly taken into account things that are required for the partnership between either Toby or one of the other sites, as well as with the PMs and the contractor. Next slide, please. Some of the items that I have up at Toby Hanna right now, for those who are familiar with the CHS program, the Common Hardware Systems, that's the organization and my team that buys all of the tactical computer systems for the Army. Very large volume, very large dollar value. The CHS-4 contract that's in place right now was not or did not utilize the partnership the way that I have now instituted for what's going to come on the follow-on contract with CHS-5. That is, as a fact, going to be mandatory in the contract that the contractors look at using the partnership as a means to make this thing happen. We have a line that's been operating since 2010 in that domain with the simple key loaders for bringing secure key to all of our operators. And we also have a partnership that we're beginning to work as we put together the crypto mod program, which is where we're going to be bringing in a very significant number of radios out of the field, upgrading their capability, and then sending them back out to the field. It's going to be a very big opportunity for the partnering of the various contractors that bid on that program. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the guys that are actually making this thing happen over at Toby Hanna. Rob?
Thank you, Stan. I also like to thank you for thinking of us, aka sustainment. All right, I'm going to go over what Toby Hanna does for the sustainment for all C4ISR, which is primarily the C3T PEO's workload. I'm going to go over some bullets of what we actually pertain and what we do, our core competencies at Toby Hanna. One, I'd like to point out that Toby Hanna is an ISO 9000 operation, so we're working at the same standard as everybody else. And we have two additional ones that's due to Air Force workload. We are certified at the AS 9100 and 9110 levels, which will give us the ability to work on aircraft and aircraft components. So go down, we have a ComSec facility that has roughly about 4,000 square feet, which is open for partnerships, and that can range from anywhere from a secret clearance to top secret, and if there's a requirement for a SCIF, we actually have a SCIF that I can give you access to. Well, another core competency is cable fabrication. Yes, we can make any cable that's short point, 1 meter, point-to-point cables, but our more specialty items would be multi-branch cabling. To include the latest insertion of technology would be rubber mold. For some reason, that's making a comeback. And our other core competency would be radio communications. We actually work on aviation, the entire cockpit, the instruments, and also the tactical radios that would PM tactical radios actually fielding, to include the HMS radios. We have a satellite campus out back in our facility, which is roughly about 35 acres with 3 Earth terminals, and then we also have the equivalent of tactical satellite links, which would be to include 1T increments 1 and 2 and the PD SATCOM arena. One area that is attractive to the small business and even the large OEMs would be our FSR support. We have 50 locations throughout the globe where we have roughly 400 employees that are permanently stationed, that are performing work. They're either embedded with the unit or they're providing warranty repairs for everything basically you can buy at Best Buy. The Panasonic laptops, HP, Compaq. And we get directly funded from Dell, so if the warfighter calls Dell to report a problem with their laptop, they'll be directed to take it to one of our Ford repair activities for repair. With that, that gives us roughly 60 years, a little bit over 60 years of experience that you can leverage through a partnership if it's partnered up front, as Stan was saying earlier. Next slide. Warranty. This is here's a list of successful partnerships that we had in the past and currently. Right now, we're working with Harris Corporation to become the Harris Warranty Repair Center for all their product line for all tactical radios. They looked at this as a duplicate effort, as we mentioned earlier, where there could be a cost savings. Harris provided training on the 117G last week. We're being provided test fixtures to operate the radio. And at that point, their premier website will be adjusted that any warfighter that has a 117G or any other radio, once they fill it out and they find out it's still under warranty, when they hit the print label, it's going to have Toby Hanna's address on it, and Harris will be funding us to do all the repairs. Likewise, if it's a battle-damaged item, Toby Hanna will be billing the warfighter for that effort. Next one is a work share. Work share generally happens with a much high dollar value contract, such as the PMD CATS has the modernization of Earth Enterprise terminals. That consists of a partnership with the Harris Corporation, where over the course of the next 10 years, they'll be manufacturing 10 terminals a year. Toby Hanna will be going out, be funded directly from the PM to provide deinstall and install the new terminal. In addition to that workload, directed from the PM's office, we'll be manufacturing the rack systems that go inside the terminals, and then all the commercial equipment will be loaded into the terminals. And together we're teamed with DISA, and we sell it off to the government at that point, and it's turned over to the Army and the Air Force to utilize. An example of small business, this is a very large success story for Toby Hanna. It's with the PSST. It was a small business set-aside, and Rivera came to Toby Hanna and said, I want to utilize some of your competencies. Honestly, they didn't have the machine shop or cable manufacturing in-house, and they're actually subcontracting Toby Hanna to do that type of workload for them. In addition, they are leveraging our FSRs to go out and do the field support that's in the field. And the last one that was brought up earlier is direct sales. Direct sales is the actual most popular activity of partnering we have, but due to usually they're low quantity orders, 1 to 10 items, there's usually not large quantities. So therefore, that dollar value, as we measure success in dollars, that's more orders, but less the dollar value. Direct sales can benefit all OEMs with that type of partnership. So with that, Toby has what you can leverage is 60 years of experience in overhaul, which if we're partnered with you or team with you up front, we can provide experiences that we experienced in the past and help influence the design and development of the future products. And then with that, we can go with questions.
All right. At this point, I would like to open it up to questions from the audience with the caveat that I have two that were handed to me on the way in that I'll go through very quickly. The first being, there's been a lot of talk about software at this particular conference and in terms of sustainment plans, et cetera. How do we begin to get after the software growth issues that are across the department? In light of that, how do you envision public-private partnerships may work in terms of software capability?
You're looking at me?
Just looking at the panel.
All right, so I'll take that one. So sort of as context, it's my view that we really need to start shifting our thinking in the Department of the Army. I know my boss mentioned in his plenum session this morning that we are seeing an exponential growth in software. That really is providing the enabler of C4ISR capabilities, but our institutional processes really have not adapted. The list that Brian provided of the current site designations in the Army, depots and arsenal, are all hardware focused. So I think we have to start adapting our processes. We are in the midst of trying to get site designation for the software center so we can attempt or begin to move to a software-enabled capability. If we do get approval, at that point we would be allowed to enter into public-private partnerships with companies to address software depot maintenance. I see them working in two fashions, at least off the top of my head. One, we could, where we don't have data rights or data or tech data, we could enter into a PPP with the OEM and start the software conducting software sustainment, so maintaining code of fielded systems under the auspices of a PPP between the OEM and the government. Another area where we could use the public-private partnership is in the use of facilities. So in some cases, a vendor would want facilities, equipment, test equipment. There could be a PPP to use our equipment, our facilities. In the case of a PO or PM that has multiple vendors that is competing in an EMD phase, that PO or PM could invest in one place, the software center, and direct the two or three OEMs to use that one place, provided there's PPP arrangements between CCOM and those companies to do testing and kind of assessments of the performance of those systems. So without the PPP, you get into some OCI issues, et cetera, but I think under the auspices of PPP, we can be more effective, and the PO gains because he can make one investment versus investing in two or three or more different companies' facilities. So I think those are sort of at least two or so, or two and a branch on the second one of how I see PPPs working in software.
Thank you. One more question. From a program management perspective, are there benefits to entering into a PPP construct, and how are these efforts potentially weighed within vendor responses to proposals?
Okay. The main benefits of the PPP process that we see is, of course, cost savings for both sides. Cost savings for the government, aka taxpayer, as well as cost savings to the contractor, because you are able to leverage the already existing facilities and people as one of your subcontractors. And a benefit for you, the contractor, is that they are firewalled so that me as the PM, I can't see what they're doing, how they're working with you and your contracts, et cetera. So that's a big one for you. I'm sorry, the second part of that question?
How could the efforts be potentially weighed in terms of vendor responses to proposals?
That one, I think I'm going to allow to switch over to contracts.
So the real issue would be in the competitive phase of a product where the government has not locked into a particular solution. How do we use the source selection process to provide an incentive for contractors to give more access to the government to the data associated with the long-term sustainment of that product? How do we actually do that? I can tell you that we haven't done a really particularly good job of that in the past when we were acquiring products either through commercial acquisitions or based upon performance specs, or where there were products with a heavy software component. And now that those products are rolling more and more into sustainment, the sustainment community is experiencing the pain of ever-escalating software license costs in aggregate, of being locked into a sole source provider with the OEM for the sustainment piece, because we don't have the data necessary to either do it ourselves or to compete it. So the initial source selection would require, as part of the source selection evaluation plan, it would require a significant or sufficient weighting in the component of sustainability such that we would be able to make a trade-off within an overall technical acceptability of a product. We would be able to make a trade-off for something that had a better life cycle sustainment construct associated with it. How would you do that? You would do that by including in the source selection a requirement that contractors address the sustainability portion of that, whether that's through warranties, whether that's through the use of perpetual software licenses, whether that's through the sharing of government purpose rights on the data, or whether that is a PPP that is proposed as the method by which the OEM would allow the government and leverage the government organic industrial base to support the product in the life cycle sustainment phase. So there is no one approach to doing it. It would be done in collaboration up front with the program managers. It would be done in collaboration with the development of the life cycle sustainment plans, and it would be a component that would sufficiently incentivize industry to take that part of it seriously and propose a significant benefit to the government, and that would then be used in the trade-off phase.
All right, those were the two questions that I had received from the floor. Are there any additional questions from our audience? I'm glad somebody stood up. Thanks.
In the traditional relationship between prime contractor and subcontractor, there are certain incentives and disincentives that you can put in, their subcontract. And I'm curious as to what incentives and disincentives prime contractor could put in a PPP contract.
I'll attempt that one. More recently, that's a question that just recently we're addressing now. We have LMP, which is our logistics modernization program, which tracks, which are our SAP-based system. That's where all the metrics are taken out of. As of right now, there is no disincentive or incentivized portion except for a PBL arrangement. And as that point, the only PBL arrangement we have is with D6A. And that's where we're the product support integrator. Other than that, everything has not been addressed in that format.
Anybody else? Sir?
Yeah, I have a question. Well, I apologize for being late. Joe talked about emerging markets for organic space. Any potential emerging markets, things that you see over the horizon
So we touched on software, the kind of institutional that we need to adapt the Army's institutional process to address the exponential growth of software, and that we're currently seeking site designation for the software center to really change and not just have PPPs for hardware, but we have to look at software as well, and that would really change kind of our interaction and our relationships with industry to get after where we stand on software and how we can more effectively and efficiently sustain software. I'm not sure if the community really knows, but the post-production software support costs to the Army are increasing significantly, and we have to get our arms around what is the right amount of maintenance we do in a cost-effective manner, and we're not there today. We have really been focused on getting equipment out, being effective in getting equipment out, getting kit out to the field. But at this point in time, as we look at budget constraints, pressures, growth in software, we really have to look at how we do business how we shift doing business going into the future. So I think that kind of hopefully touches on the points.
No, that touches on it. I mean, I want to make sure everybody understands that organic industrial
So I thought I'd add a couple of things. First of all, to pick up on one of the things that General Crawford mentioned, not only software, but I also see an emerging growth opportunity is something that Rob had talked about with Toby Hanna in the case of the aerostats. I think an untapped market is the ability of small business to leverage the organic industrial base to provide facilities that they don't then have to invest to create, especially when they haven't assured themselves of an enduring requirement beyond an individual contract. So I think that's something that I think our small business communities, our PTACs need to push as an opportunity, because a lot of small businesses have some really great innovative approaches to things, but the hurdle of getting the facilities and getting the capability of producing those things is a pretty high hurdle. And so oftentimes what they do is they end up selling their good ideas to somebody who's already facilitized to do that. And while that's not a bad thing because we get access to it that way, it would help, I think, grow the competitive base by being able to leverage these facilities. I'd also talk to your question about the type of incentives or disincentives that we may have in a PPP that would replicate what is available in the private sector. So I talked about the liability, where we require the private sector entity to indemnify the government from liability. So that pretty much says all of the things that private sector has as a disincentive to fail as a subcontractor, we've pretty much eliminated that. However, on the incentive side, we'd be open to just about any kind of incentive that does exist positively. So rewarding better performance, rewarding faster performance, rewarding cheaper performance, those are all things that could be entertained and are pretty much open-ended as to what they can do.
Any additional questions?
I have a question regarding the limited cybersecurity resources available in the market. And I'm just curious if the PPP could potentially be used as a mechanism to partner with industry to bring skills and resources to the table to help solve problems in that area.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. It would be critical that it be focused on the things that the government has that critical capability, or test facilities or lab facilities. The whole cyber area is one which is getting more and more attention as we hear about all of the intrusions that exist. And so what we've done in the cyber arena is we collectively, the economy as a whole, have been very rapid adopters of capability, which also now we're coming to realize introduces vulnerabilities. And so the cost of going backwards and repairing those vulnerabilities is something that we haven't even totally figured out. And using a PPP where you could leverage a more cost-effective either workforce or facilities to do something like that, I think is very much within the realm. And as soon as, and I say that positively, as soon as the Software Engineering Center receives the appropriate designation, they would be open for business in that area.
Anybody else? I like this. Everybody's asking questions. It's good.
What sort of time frame are you looking at for the Software Engineering Center to receive that designation?
So not to be presumptuous, but it's been through our 4-star headquarters, and it's been through ASALT, and it's up with the secretary now. So one could hope that it would happen by the end of November. But you never know once it gets up there but at a community level, we're pretty hopeful, and kind of everyone's acknowledged that, software is really the next great enabler, or the great enabler of capability in the Army. It's, we've kind of shifted, and we are actually to be frank, the Army is a bit behind the times from that perspective. The Air Force has software site designation. They have 3 software depots already. The Army has none, and so we think, from a Department of Defense perspective, it's in line with kind of what other services have in place. So don't quote me on the month, though.
So I thought Larry was going to say soon, and that reminded me of the time when my younger son kept asking his mother, when can I have this, when can I have that? And she kept saying, soon, Daniel, soon. And he said, oh, no, not that long.
Anybody else? All right, going once, going twice. All right, thank you everybody for participating, and obviously if you have any individual questions, we'll stick around for a few minutes.